Welcome, and settle in close. Tonight's story takes us to the Nebraska Territory in the fall of 1876, where loss and justice would intertwine with unexpected love on the American frontier. 1876, Nebraska Territory. Margaret Monroe stood at the fence line watching the autumn sun sink toward the Platte River, her hands gripping the weathered wood so hard her knuckles turned white. 3 months. That's all the time the banker gave her before he'd take everything. The farm, the house, the land her father had died protecting. All because her brother Thomas vanished without a trace. And with him went the deed that proved their rightful ownership. She was 32 years old, a widow, and according to Luther Carlyle, the new banker who'd arrived from Omaha 3 months ago, she had no legal right to this land. Never mind that she'd been born in that house. Never mind that her father's blood had soaked into this Nebraska soil when claim jumpers shot him 5 years back. Never mind that she'd kept this farm running through drought and locusts and bitter winters. Without the deed, she was nothing. And Thomas was gone. The sound of a horse approaching made her turn. A rider emerged from the cottonwoods along the river, moving with the easy confidence of someone who belonged to this land in ways she never would. As he drew closer, she saw he was Cheyenne, his long black hair loose in the wind, wearing a mix of buckskin and trail clothes that marked him as a scout. Her hand moved instinctively toward the rifle leaning against the fence post, not out of fear, but caution. These were dangerous times. The war with the Sioux and Cheyenne had ended just months ago with Custer's death at Little Bighorn, and tensions still ran high. The man raised his hand in a gesture of peace, slowing his horse to a walk. As he came closer, she could see he was perhaps in his mid-30s, with strong features and eyes that missed nothing. There was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet dignity mixed with watchfulness, that made her hand fall away from the rifle. He stopped his horse a respectful distance away. When he spoke, his English was perfect, touched with an accent that spoke of two worlds. "I am looking for Thomas Monroe. I was told I might find him here." Margaret's heart lurched. "You know my brother?" Something flickered in his dark eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "Your brother? Then you are Margaret Monroe." It wasn't a question. She straightened her shoulders, suddenly aware of how she must look. Her dress was faded and patched, her hands rough from work, her face weathered by sun and worry. But she met his gaze steadily. "I am. And you are?" "Joshua Ashford. I scout for the army post at Fort McPherson, though I am Cheyenne." He dismounted, moving with fluid grace. "Your brother sent word 2 months ago. He said he had information about something that happened during the Sand Creek massacre. Something I have been searching for. He asked me to come. But when I arrived at the address he gave, I found only a burned building and no trace of him." The world seemed to tilt beneath Margaret's feet. 2 months ago. That was just before Thomas disappeared. Sand Creek? That was 12 years ago. 12 years since my sister was taken, Joshua said quietly. Your brother claimed he knew what happened to her. Margaret gripped the fence post again, her mind racing. Thomas had never mentioned anything about Sand Creek or a missing Cheyenne girl. But then, Thomas had been keeping secrets. She'd known that much. He'd been nervous those last few weeks, always looking over his shoulder, talking about setting things right. "Mr. Ashford," she said carefully, "my brother disappeared 2 months ago. The same week you say he sent you that message. I've been searching for him ever since, but it's like he vanished into thin air. And now I'm about to lose this farm, because he took the deed with him when he left." Joshua's expression sharpened with interest. "The deed to your land is missing?" "Missing. Stolen. I don't know." The frustration that had been building for months threatened to overflow. Luther Carlisle showed up from Omaha 3 months back, said the bank owned a note on this property that was coming due. Demanded to see the deed. Thomas went to get it from the lockbox where Father always kept it. But it wasn't there. 2 days later, Thomas rode into town and never came back. His horse returned without him. No body, no blood, nothing. Just gone. She saw Joshua processing this information, his intelligent eyes thoughtful. "This banker. You trust him?" Margaret gave a bitter laugh. "I don't trust anyone anymore. But what choice do I have? Without that deed, I can't prove ownership. Carlisle says if I can't produce it in 3 months, the bank forecloses and the farm goes to auction. He's already got a buyer lined up, apparently. Some cattle baron from Omaha. Your father. He had the original deed? Filed with the land office, yes. But Carlisle claims there was a fire at the Omaha office 5 years ago. All the records from this county were destroyed. The only proof of ownership is the deed itself." She shook her head. "It's too convenient. All of it." Joshua was quiet for a long moment, his gaze sweeping across the farm. The fields lay harvested, the hay stored, everything neat and well tended despite her being alone. She'd worked herself nearly to exhaustion, keeping it going, hoping Thomas would come back, hoping she could save what her father had built. "Your brother and my sister," Joshua said finally. "Both missing, both connected to this land. I do not believe in coincidence." Neither did she. Margaret studied the Cheyenne scout, weighing her options. She had no reason to trust him. But something in his eyes, a pain that matched her own, made her want to. He knew what it was to lose family. He understood the desperation of searching for answers that refused to come. "Come up to the house," she heard herself say. "If Thomas contacted you, there might be something in his room. A letter, a map, anything. I've looked 100 times, but maybe you'll see something I missed." Joshua nodded, gathering his horse's reins. As they walked toward the farmhouse together, the last light of day painting everything in shades of amber and gold, Margaret felt something shift. She'd been alone in this fight for so long. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be anymore. The farmhouse was simple, but well kept. 2 stories of weathered wood that had stood against 20 Nebraska winters. Margaret showed Joshua where to tie his horse, then led him inside. The main room served as kitchen and living space both, with a stone fireplace that provided heat and cooking surface. Everything was clean and orderly, but sparse. She'd sold most of the furniture over the past few months, trying to scrape together money for the bank payment. "Thomas's room is upstairs," she said, lighting an oil lamp as dusk deepened. "I'll make coffee while you look. You've come a long way." She was aware of him moving through her home, his footsteps soft on the wooden stairs. Strange how it didn't feel like an intrusion. She put coffee on to boil, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind spun. Sand Creek. She'd been a girl when news of that massacre reached Nebraska. The horror of it made worse by the fact that it wasn't a battle but a slaughter. Cheyenne and Arapaho families, mostly women and children and old men, camped under a white flag of peace, and the Colorado militia had attacked anyway, killing hundreds. If Joshua's sister had been there, had been taken, Margaret closed her eyes against the wave of sorrow. So much loss, so much pain that never seemed to heal, just scarred over and ached in the cold. Footsteps on the stairs brought her back. Joshua appeared carrying a wooden box, his expression grim. This was hidden under a loose floorboard. Your brother went to some trouble to conceal it. Margaret's heart hammered as she brought the coffee to the table. She'd searched Thomas's room so many times, never finding that loose board. Joshua set the box down gently and opened it. Inside were papers, a few photographs, and a folded letter sealed with wax. "The letter is addressed to me," Joshua said quietly. He broke the seal and read, his expression growing darker with each line. Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Your brother discovered something that connects my sister's disappearance to this land." "What?" Joshua handed her the letter. Margaret read Thomas's hurried handwriting, the words making her blood run cold. "Joshua, if you're reading this, I'm either dead or running. I found proof that Luther Carlisle was at Sand Creek in 1864. He was a sergeant then, part of Chivington's militia. After the massacre, he took several Cheyenne children, planning to sell them back east to families wanting servants. Your sister was one of them. But that's not all. Carlisle didn't just steal children. He stole land deeds. Lots of them. From families killed in the massacre, from settlers who died on the trails, anywhere he could. He's been using them for years, claiming land all across Nebraska and Colorado, selling it to buyers back east who don't know it's stolen. Our father caught him at it 5 years ago. That's why father was killed. Not by claim jumpers, by Carlisle's men, made to look like claim jumpers. And now Carlisle's come for our land too, because we know too much. I've hidden the evidence, including proof of what he did to your sister and where she ended up. The deed to our farm is hidden too. Find Margaret. Keep her safe. Don't let Carlisle take our land. It's all in the old Monroe place." Margaret's hands shook. The old Monroe place. That's the original homestead, 3 miles north. Father built this house later, but the old soddy is still standing. She looked at Joshua, seeing her own shock reflected in his eyes. "Carlisle killed my father, and now he's trying to finish what he started. He will not succeed." Joshua's voice was quiet, but carried absolute conviction. "We will find this evidence. We will stop him." "We?" She said nor that a supposed back to me, one seat was soft, supposed to round her. 2 months lean story, where their mother, Hugh said. Their rest place where a lost whiles white. Whist tie-end. Cone straining a didn't shout at that thing. But also minded then, I call it coning to play or suppose. His eyes softened slightly. "Your fight is now my fight. Your brother tried to help me find my sister. The least I can do is help you save your home." He paused. "And perhaps, together, we will find answers for both of us." Margaret felt something warm unfurl in her chest, easing the loneliness that had gripped her for so long. She wasn't alone anymore. This man, this stranger, who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to voice, was offering to stand beside her. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll go to the old homestead at first light. If Carlyle suspects we know something, he'll act fast." Joshua nodded. "I will sleep in your barn tonight. Keep watch. If your brother was right about the danger, Carlyle may already know I am here." "There's a spare room upstairs," Margaret offered, then felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I mean, you don't have to sleep in the barn. It's cold at night now." Something flickered in his eyes, an awareness that made her pulse quicken. But he only said, "The barn is fine. I am used to cold." His lips curved slightly. "And it is proper. I would not want to damage your reputation." Despite everything, despite the fear and the danger and the weight of what they'd learned, Margaret almost smiled. "Mr. Ashford, I'm a widow living alone on a failing farm with a bank foreclosure hanging over my head. I think my reputation can survive you sleeping in the spare room." "Joshua," he said quietly. "Not Mr. Ashford, just Joshua." "Joshua," she repeated, and the name felt right in her mouth. "I'm Margaret." "I know." And the way he said it, with that slight smile still playing at the corners of his mouth, made her realize he'd known her name from the moment he arrived. Had perhaps known more about her than she'd realized. They sat at the table as full darkness fell outside, going through the rest of the box's contents. There were papers in Thomas's handwriting, notes about Carlyle's movements, names of men who might be working for him. Photographs, too. One showed a group of soldiers, and Thomas had circled one face, a younger Luther Carlyle, but unmistakably him. And there was a small photograph of a Cheyenne girl, perhaps 8 years old, her dark eyes solemn. On the back, someone had written a name in Cheyenne. Joshua held it for a long time, his expression carefully neutral, but Margaret saw his hands tremble slightly. "Your sister?" she asked softly. "Yes. Little bird. She was 7 when they took her." His voice was rough. "I have been searching for 12 years. Every trail went cold. Every lead ended nowhere. Until your brother's message." Margaret reached across the table without thinking, her hand covering his. His skin was warm, calloused from work and weather like her own. "We'll find out what happened to her, I promise." Joshua looked at their joined hands, then up at her face. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition deeper than words. Two people marked by loss, by the weight of protecting what remained, by the bone-deep weariness of fighting alone. And perhaps the beginning of something else, something that felt almost like hope. "Tell me about this farm," Joshua said after a moment, not pulling his hand away. "Why is it worth fighting for?" Margaret smiled, a real smile that felt strange on her face after months of worry. "My father came here in 1856, right after Nebraska became a territory. He said this land along the Platte was perfect. Rich soil, good water, close to the emigrant trails. He built the soddy first, just him and my mother. Thomas and I were both born there. Mother died when I was 12. Fever took her one winter." She paused, remembering. "Father raised us himself after that. Taught Thomas to farm, taught me to shoot and ride and keep books. Said a woman needed to be able to stand on her own 2 feet. especially out here. Her smile turned sad. He was right about that. Your husband? Dead 3 years now. Fever, like mother. We only had 2 years together. She met Joshua's eyes. I loved him, but it wasn't a grand passion. He was kind. That was enough. Joshua nodded slowly. My wife died 8 years ago. Cholera. We had 1 winter together before she got sick. He paused. I know what it is to be alone. They sat in the lamplight. 2 people who'd survived when others hadn't. Who carried ghosts and kept going anyway. Outside, the prairie wind whispered against the walls. Tomorrow they would ride into danger. Tonight, for just a moment, they could sit in the warmth and let themselves feel less alone. The spare room, Joshua said finally. If the offer still stands. It does. He rose, gathering his saddlebags. Margaret showed him upstairs, pointing out the small room that had been her father's. It held only a narrow bed and a washstand now, but it was clean. Thank you, Joshua said, for trusting me. Thank you for coming. Margaret hesitated in the doorway. Joshua? I'm glad you're here. His eyes met hers, warm in the lamplight. So am I. Margaret lay awake long after she'd retreated to her own room, listening to the old house settle around her. For the first time in months, she didn't feel the crushing weight of fear when she thought about the morning. She wasn't facing it alone anymore. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. Dawn came cold and clear. The autumn air sharp with the promise of winter. Margaret woke to find Joshua already up, his horse saddled and waiting. She'd heard him, moving around before first light, the quiet sounds of someone used to early mornings and careful preparations. She dressed quickly in her riding clothes, braided her hair back tight, and met him in the yard. He'd made coffee, strong and hot, and handed her a tin cup without a word. They drank standing in the pale light, watching the sun paint the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. 3 miles north, Margaret said, pointing. The old homestead is in a hollow near Frog Creek. Father chose the spot because it was sheltered from the winter winds. Joshua nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon with the practiced alertness of a scout. We should assume Carlisle is watching. If your brother was right, he knows we are a threat. They rode out as the sun cleared the horizon, Margaret on her sturdy mare and Joshua on his paint gelding. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, autumn grass bronze and gold. The cottonwoods along the creeks already half bare. It was beautiful and harsh all at once. This land that demanded everything and gave back only to those strong enough to take it. The old soddy sat in its hollow like it had grown from the earth itself, which in a way it had. Sod bricks cut from prairie grass, chinked with clay, a roof of wooden poles and more sod. The door hung crooked on leather hinges. Windows that had never held glass were just dark openings now. Margaret hadn't been here in years. Looking at it brought back a rush of memories. Her mother singing while she cooked. Thomas as a toddler, chasing chickens in the yard. Her father's laugh, big and warm. All of them gone now, one way or another. Joshua dismounted and approached the soddy cautiously, his hand near the knife at his belt. Margaret followed, her rifle ready. But the place was empty, silent except for the wind whistling through cracks in the walls. Inside, The single room was dim and musty. A broken table, a rusted stove, little else remained. Mice had nested in the corners. A snake slithered away as they entered. Thomas said he hid the evidence here, Margaret said, looking around doubtfully. But where? Joshua moved methodically through the space, checking the walls, the floor, even the old stove. Finally, he knelt by the stone fireplace. His fingers found something, and with a grunt of effort, he pulled. One of the hearthstones came loose, revealing a hollow beneath. Inside was an oilskin packet, carefully sealed. Joshua pulled it out gently, then replaced the stone. They stepped outside into the clean morning air before opening it. The packet contained more documents, all in Thomas's hand or copied from official records. Proof of Carlisle's presence at Sand Creek. Lists of children taken, including Little Bird, with notations of where they'd been sold. Land deeds, dozens of them, all bearing forged signatures, and their farm's deed, the original, with the Monroe name clear and legal. He did it, Margaret breathed. Thomas got the proof, but there was more. A final letter, this one addressed to Margaret. Sister, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Carlisle found out what I knew. I have to run, lead him away from you. The evidence is here. Take it to Fort McPherson, to Captain Harrison. He's honest. He'll help. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you everything. I was trying to protect you. But I learned something else, something about Father. He didn't just catch Carlisle stealing. He helped some of those Cheyenne children, the ones Carlisle took. Got them to safety when he could. Helped them find their families. Father was a good man, better than I knew. Find Joshua Ashford. He's Cheyenne, a scout. I sent for him. He's looking for his sister. The evidence about her is in here. Help him if you can. He's a good man too. You can trust him. Be safe. Be happy. Don't let Carlisle win. The farm is yours. Fight for it. Your brother, Thomaston's. I figure that I'm not your him. Your Lestons, your lost whiles await. And then tired. Time my preandiestons and comets. Your brother, Thomas. Margaret's vision blurred with tears. Thomas had died, protecting her. Had died trying to set right an old wrong, to help a man he'd never met find his lost sister. Her foolish, brave, impossible brother. Joshua was reading through the documents about Little Bird, his expression carefully controlled, but his eyes bright with emotion. Finally, he looked up. She was sold to a family in St. Louis, the Harrisons. They renamed her Sarah. He swallowed hard. These documents say she lived there until she was 16, then married a merchant, a man named Robert Chen. They moved to San Francisco in 1872. She's alive, Margaret said. Joshua, your sister is alive. He nodded slowly, and she saw a tear slip down his cheek before he roughly wiped it away. 12 years. I thought she was dead. We all thought. His voice broke. Margaret moved without thinking, her arms going around him. He stood rigid for a moment, then his arms came around her, holding tight. She felt him shaking with the force of emotions held back too long, felt her own tears falling for her brother. her father, for all the loss and all the love that had brought them to this moment. They stood like that in the autumn sunlight. Two people who'd fought alone for so long, finally letting someone else share the burden. When Joshua finally pulled back, his eyes were red but clear, his expression lighter than she'd yet seen it. "Your brother gave me back my sister," he said quietly. "I will not let his sacrifice be for nothing. We will stop Carlisle. We will save your farm." "Our farm," Margaret heard herself say. Then, bolder, "If we win this fight, if we get the land back, I need help running it. A partner. Someone I can trust." She met his eyes. "Stay, please. Help me rebuild what they tried to destroy." Joshua looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his dark eyes. "You would trust a Cheyenne to work your land? To be your partner?" "I trust you, Joshua. Not because you're Cheyenne, or a scout, or anything else. I trust you because you came when my brother called. Because you're fighting for justice, not revenge. Because you held my hand last night when I needed it." She took a breath. "And because when I look at you, I don't feel alone anymore." The words hung between them, meaning more than she'd intended to say. Joshua's hand came up, his calloused fingers gentle as they touched her cheek. "When I look at you," he said softly, "I see home." The kiss was soft, tentative, a question asked and answered. Margaret felt warmth flood through her, chasing away the cold that had lived in her chest for so long. His arms came around her again, but different this time. Not comfort, but connection. Not solace, but promise. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, both smiling. "We should probably defeat the villain before we plan our future," Margaret said, trying for lightness. Joshua's smile widened. "Practical. I like that." Then his expression sobered. "But yes, Carlisle will not give up easily. And now we have what he wants." They gathered the evidence carefully, storing it in Joshua's saddlebags. The ride back to the farm was quick, both of them alert for signs of trouble. As they crested the final rise, Margaret's heart sank. 4 men waited in her yard. One was Luther Carlisle, impeccable in his city clothes, his expression pleasant as always. The other 3 were harder men, guns obvious on their hips. "Miss Monroe," Carlisle called cheerfully as they approached. "I heard you had a visitor. Thought I'd stop by and introduce myself properly." Margaret and Joshua exchanged a glance. They both knew this was more than a social call. Margaret dismounted, moving to stand in front of her house, rifle held ready but not quite aimed. Joshua stayed mounted, his hand near his knife. Carlisle's eyes flicked to Joshua, and something cold moved in them. "A Cheyenne. How interesting. I didn't realize you were keeping such unusual company, Miss Monroe." "This is Joshua Ashford," Margaret said, her voice steady. "He's a scout from Fort McPherson, and he's helping me locate my brother." "Ah, yes, your missing brother. A shame about that." Carlisle's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I do hope he turns up. But regardless, the matter of the deed remains. You have 2 more months, Miss Monroe, unless you can produce the document proving ownership. I'm afraid the bank will have no choice but to foreclose." End quote. "I'll find it," Margaret said. "I'm sure you'll try." Carlisle tipped his hat. "Well, I won't keep you. Just wanted to make sure you understood the timeline." 60 days, Miss Monroe. Not a day more. He glanced at Joshua again. And Mr. Ashford? I'd be careful. The prairie can be dangerous for strangers. Accidents happen. It was a threat, clear as day. Joshua's expression didn't change, but Margaret saw his hand tighten on the reins. I will be careful, he said quietly. You should be too. Carlyle's smile vanished. For just a moment, Margaret saw the man beneath the pleasant facade. Hard. Ruthless. Dangerous. Then he nodded to his men, and they rode out. Margaret waited until they were out of sight before she let herself shake. Joshua dismounted quickly, his hand steadying her. He knows, she said. He knows we found something. Yes, which means we must act quickly. Joshua looked toward the house. We ride to Fort McPherson tonight. Give the evidence to this Captain Harrison your brother mentioned. Once it is in official hands, Carlyle cannot silence us without bringing down more trouble than even he can handle. Margaret nodded. Fort McPherson was 15 miles south. A hard ride in the dark, but possible. We'll need supplies. Food. Water. Extra ammunition. She met his eyes. He'll try to stop us. Let him try. Joshua's expression was grim. I have been hunted before. I know how to disappear when I need to. They spent the afternoon preparing, packing light but taking everything essential. Margaret left a letter for her neighbors explaining where she'd gone, just in case. If something happened to them both, at least someone would know the truth. As dusk fell, they saddled their horses and checked their weapons one last time. The evidence was secure in Joshua's saddlebags, wrapped in oilskin against weather and damage. Margaret wore her warmest coat, her rifle strapped to her saddle. Joshua had his knife, a revolver, and the quiet confidence of a man who'd survived worse odds. They rode out under a rising moon, taking the old emigrant trail that ran south toward the fort. The prairie stretched silver and black around them, peaceful and beautiful and utterly exposed. Margaret felt her nerves singing with tension. Every shadow could hide danger. Every sound could be threat. Joshua seemed to sense her fear. He moved his horse closer, his presence solid and reassuring. Tell me about your father, he said quietly. What was he like? Margaret understood what he was doing, keeping her mind occupied, her fear at bay. She smiled despite herself. Stubborn. Lord, was he stubborn. Once he decided something was right, nothing could move him. Mother used to say he was like a tree rooted deep. You could bend him but never break him. Your brother said he helped the children, the ones Carlyle took. I didn't know about that until today, but it makes sense. Margaret's throat tightened. Father always said every child deserved protection. Didn't matter who they were or where they came from. When homesteaders passed through, if they had children who were sick or hungry, he'd always find a way to help. Mother would feed them, father would fix their wagons. They never turned anyone away. Joshua was quiet for a moment. My people remember men like your father, the ones who saw us as human, not savages. There were not many, but we remember. He would have liked you, Margaret said. Father respected men who honored their word and protected their families. That's all he ever asked of anyone. They rode in comfortable silence after that, the miles passing beneath their horses' hooves. The moon climbed higher, painting the prairie in shades of silver. Margaret found herself watching Joshua. The easy way he sat his horse, the constant awareness in his eyes that never seemed to rest. He'd spent his life reading the land, understanding dangers before they struck. That skill might save them both tonight. Around midnight, they stopped to rest the horses and share dried meat and water. They didn't risk a fire, just sat close together in the darkness, listening to the night sounds. Coyotes called in the distance. An owl hunted overhead on silent wings. "What will you do?" Margaret asked softly. "When this is over, will you go to San Francisco? Try to find your sister?" Joshua's arm was around her shoulders, and she could feel him considering the question. "Yes. I need to see her, know she is well. But after..." He paused. "You asked me to stay, to help rebuild your farm. Does the offer still stand?" Margaret's heart beat faster. "It does, more than ever. Then I will return." His voice was rough with emotion. "If you will have me, not just as a partner in the farm, but..." He trailed off, struggling with the words. Margaret turned to face him, her hand coming up to touch his cheek. In the moonlight, his features were all plains and shadows, beautiful and strong. "I know what you're asking," she said softly. "And yes, Joshua, yes." This kiss was different from the first. Deeper, more certain. A promise made under the stars, witnessed by the prairie that had taken so much from both of them, and now offered a chance at something precious. His hands framed her face with such tenderness it made her ache. When they finally broke apart, both were shaking. "We should keep moving," Joshua said, his voice unsteady. "Put as much distance as possible between us and Carlisle before dawn." They rode on, but something had shifted between them. No longer just allies joined by circumstance, but two people choosing each other. Choosing a future together, if they could survive long enough to claim it. Dawn was still an hour away when Joshua suddenly reined in his horse, his whole body going tense. Margaret stopped beside him, her hand moving to her rifle. "What is it?" "Riders. Behind us. Moving fast." His eyes scanned the horizon. 4, maybe 5. Margaret's stomach clenched. "Carlisle. We need cover. Somewhere we can defend." Joshua pointed to a line of cottonwoods marking a creek bed about a half-mile east. "There. We can fort up. Make them come to us on our terms." They urged their horses into a gallop, racing the approaching dawn and the men hunting them. The cottonwoods loomed closer, their bare branches skeletal against the paling sky. Margaret could hear the pursuing riders now, the thunder of hooves growing louder. They crashed into the creek bed, splashing through shallow water to a spot where the bank had eroded, creating a natural hollow. Joshua dismounted quickly, pulling his rifle free. "Get down. Stay behind the horses." Margaret obeyed, her heart hammering. She could see them now. 5 riders, coming fast. Carlisle in the lead, his city clothes looking out of place in the wild landscape. The men with him were hard cases, The kind who killed for money and never lost sleep over it. They stopped just out of rifle range, Carlyle raising a hand. "Miss Monroe," he called. "I think you have something that belongs to me. Hand it over, and we can all go home peacefully." "The evidence belongs to the law," Margaret shouted back. "We're taking it to Fort McPherson. You can't stop us." Carlyle's laugh was cold. "Can't I? You're outnumbered, outgunned, and miles from help. Be reasonable. Give me the documents, and I'll let you both ride away. You have my word." "Your word means nothing," Joshua said, his voice carrying across the distance. "You stole children, murdered innocents, took land that was not yours. Your word is worthless." Carlyle's expression hardened. "So be it. Boys, take them. Try not to damage the woman too much. She might still be useful." The riders split up, 3 heading left to flank them, 2 staying with Carlyle. Margaret raised her rifle, sighting on the nearest man. Beside her, Joshua was utterly calm, his breathing steady. "Wait until they're close," he murmured. "Make every shot count." The riders came in fast, whooping and firing wild shots meant to frighten. Margaret held her nerve, waiting. When the first man was 30 yards out, she squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The man jerked and fell from his horse. Joshua fired almost simultaneously, dropping another rider. The remaining 3 pulled up short, suddenly less eager to charge a position that could shoot back accurately. They retreated to confer with Carlyle. "2 down," Joshua said, already reloading. "But they will be more careful now, and we have limited ammunition." Margaret knew he was right. They couldn't hold out forever, but maybe they didn't have to. "How far to the fort?" 5 miles, maybe 6. "If one of us rides fast, makes it to the fort, brings back soldiers." "No." Joshua's voice was firm. "We stay together. I will not leave you to face them alone. But if we both stay, we both die. At least this way, one of us gets the evidence to safety." Margaret met his eyes, seeing the fear there that matched her own. "I can hold them off. I'm a good shot, and I have the high ground. You're faster. You know the land better. You have to go." "Margaret," she ended Nord was supposed to decree, once just, surpassed around her. "In the stress to win the whither another him, or where there is this place where a lost whiles white, I'll lap Cheyenne. Cone like dranding a tense caldenemt. I'll at Halmai has done, all the crying the placador spose. Please." She touched his face, memorizing the feel of him. "Joshua, please, if we die here, Carlyle wins. He keeps stealing, keeps killing. We can't let that happen. And your sister, she needs to know you were looking for her, that you never gave up." Joshua's jaw worked, emotion flooding his eyes. "I cannot lose you. Not now. Not when I finally found you. You won't lose me. I'll hold them off, then slip away in the confusion when the soldiers arrive. We'll meet at the fort." She tried to smile. "Trust me, I'm a Nebraska farm girl. We're tougher than we look." For a long moment, Joshua just looked at her. Then he pulled her close, kissing her hard and desperate. "I will come back for you," he said against her lips. "I swear it. Hold on. Just hold on." He mounted his horse, the saddlebags with their precious evidence secure. Margaret gripped her rifle, watching as Carlyle's men prepared for another charge. "Go," she said. "Now, while they're focused on me." Joshua hesitated one more second, his eyes burning into hers. Then he wheeled his horse and took off south, low over the animal's neck, riding like the wind itself. Carlyle saw him go and roared with fury. "After him! Don't let him reach the fort!" Two riders peeled off in pursuit. Margaret raised her rifle and fired, clipping one horse and sending it stumbling. The rider went down hard. That left 3 men still focused on her position, including Carlyle. "Looks like your friend abandoned you," Carlyle called. "Smart man. Now, Miss Monroe, let's talk about your future. Or rather, your lack of one." Margaret levered another round into the chamber. "Come and get me, Carlyle. Let's see how brave you are when you're not hiding behind hired guns." His face twisted with rage. He gestured to his remaining men. They spread out, trying to approach from multiple angles. Margaret fired at one, forcing him back. But she couldn't watch all directions at once. They were going to rush her, overwhelm her position by sheer numbers. She thought of Joshua, riding hard for the fort. Thought of the life they'd planned in those precious hours together. A farm rebuilt. A partnership forged in fire. Love grown from shared pain into something strong and lasting. She'd hold them off as long as she could. Give Joshua every second he needed. One of Carlyle's men broke cover, charging her position. Margaret fired, missed, fired again. He went down 10 feet away. But while she was focused on him, another approached from the side. She spun, too late. He was on her, grabbing the rifle barrel, wrenching it from her hands. Margaret fought like a wildcat, kicking and clawing. She got her boot knife free and slashed at him. He cursed and backhanded her, sending her sprawling. Stars exploded across her vision. When her sight cleared, Carlyle stood over her, his revolver pointed at her head. His pleasant mask was gone completely now, replaced by something cold and vicious. "You should have taken my offer," he said. "But you just had to be difficult. Just like your father. Just like your meddling brother. You killed them." Margaret spat, tasting blood. "You killed my family. I did what was necessary to protect my interests. Nothing personal." He thumbed back the hammer. "Goodbye, Miss Monroe." The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the morning air. Margaret flinched, waiting for the impact, the pain. But nothing happened. She opened her eyes to see Carlyle stumbling backward, a red stain spreading across his chest. He looked down at it in disbelief, then crumpled. Behind him, Captain Harrison sat his horse, still holding his smoking revolver. Around him, a dozen cavalry troopers spread out, weapons trained on Carlyle's remaining men. The hired guns threw down their weapons immediately, hands raised in surrender. "Miss Monroe?" Captain Harrison dismounted, offering his hand. "Are you hurt?" Margaret took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. Her head spun, her body ached, but she was alive. "I'm fine." "Joshua? Where's Joshua?" "Right here." Joshua appeared at the edge of the creek bed, dismounting before his horse even stopped. He ran to her, his hands gentle as they checked her for injuries, his eyes wild with fear. "You are hurt. Your face." "I'm fine. I'm fine." Margaret threw her arms around him, holding tight. You came back. I found the patrol 2 miles out. Captain Harrison had already mobilized when he received your letter yesterday afternoon. They were coming to investigate your claims about Carlisle. Joshua pulled back just enough to see her face. I thought I had lost you. When I heard that shot, I'm here. I'm safe. Margaret touched his face, feeling him shake with the aftermath of fear. We did it. We stopped him. Captain Harrison approached, his expression grave. Miss Monroe, Mr. Ashford gave me the evidence you found. It's more than enough to hang Carlisle if he survives that wound, which I doubt he will. He paused. I'm sorry about your father and brother. They were good men. They deserved better. They got justice, Margaret said quietly. That's what they would have wanted. The captain nodded. We'll need your statements, both of you. And there's the matter of your land. With the original deed recovered and Carlisle's fraud exposed, your ownership is beyond question. The bank will have to honor it. Margaret felt tears sting her eyes. The farm was saved. Her father's legacy was secure. And standing beside her, his arm around her waist, was the man who'd made it possible. The man she loved. Over the next few days, the pieces fell into place. Carlisle died of his wound before the soldiers even got him back to town. His hired guns, facing murder charges, sang like birds, confirming everything Thomas had documented. The banker who'd been working with Carlisle from Omaha was arrested. A new, honest banker was appointed to handle the foreclosure reversal. Margaret's deed was filed properly with the new land office. The farm was unquestionably hers. More than that, Captain Harrison had arranged for compensation from the cattle baron who'd been planning to buy her land, payment for the conspiracy to defraud. It was enough to pay off any remaining debts and fund repairs and improvements. Joshua stayed at the farm while everything was sorted out, sleeping in the spare room with scrupulous propriety, despite the fact that everyone in town knew they'd be married soon. Margaret didn't mind the wait. After so much rushing and danger, it felt good to take time, to court each other properly, to build their future on a foundation of certainty, not just survival. 2 weeks after the confrontation at the creek, a letter arrived from San Francisco. Joshua opened it with shaking hands, Margaret standing close beside him for support. It was from a woman named Sarah Chen, formerly Little Bird of the Cheyenne. She wrote in careful English about her life, about the family who'd bought her and later adopted her, about the husband she loved and the children she was raising. She wrote about always wondering what happened to her birth family, about the hole in her heart that never quite healed. And she wrote about how grateful she was to know that her brother had been searching for her, that she hadn't been forgotten, that she was loved. She asked if Joshua would come visit, asked if he would tell her about their parents, their people, the life she'd been torn from, asked if, perhaps, she could be part of a family again. Joshua read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. Margaret held him while he wept, her own tears falling for the reunion that was finally possible. 12 years of searching, of grief, of never giving up. And now, hope. We'll go, Margaret said when he could speak again. In the spring, after the planting is done, we'll go to San Francisco together. Meet your sister. Let her know her brother found a home, found love, found peace. Joshua kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Our home, he said. Our love, our peace, together. The day of their wedding was bright and clear, autumn giving way to the first hints of winter. The whole town turned out, curious to see the widow marry the Cheyenne scout. If there were whispers, Margaret didn't hear them. If there were disapproving looks, Joshua didn't care. They stood before the circuit preacher in the town's small church, their hands joined, their eyes locked on each other. "Do you, Margaret Monroe, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Her voice was steady, sure. This was the easiest promise she'd ever made. "Do you, Joshua Ashford, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His smile made her heart soar. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Joshua cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. The kiss was chaste enough for the church audience, but Margaret felt the heat of it, the promise of all the nights to come. When they broke apart, the congregation applauded. Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Even old Mr. Fletcher smiled. They walked out of the church into the afternoon sunlight as Mr. and Mrs. Joshua Ashford, ready to face whatever came next. Together. The wedding supper was held at the farm, neighbors bringing food and good wishes. Tables were set up in the yard, lanterns hung from the porch. Someone brought a fiddle, and soon there was dancing on the packed earth. Margaret found herself passed from partner to partner, but her eyes always found Joshua. He watched her with such open adoration that it made her blush. When the dancing finally wound down and the guests began to drift away, Margaret and Joshua stood on the porch, waving goodbye to the last wagon. Then they were alone, the night settling around them, the stars brilliant overhead. Joshua took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Are you happy?" Margaret thought about everything that had brought them here. The loss and the grief, the danger and the fear. Her father's death, her brother's, sacrifice. Joshua's 12-year search for his sister. All the pain that had shaped them, carved them into people who could appreciate the gift they'd been given. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm happy." He led her inside, closing the door on the world. This was their home now, truly theirs. The farm they would work together, the life they would build, the family they might raise, if they were blessed. All of it possible because they'd been brave enough to fight for it, brave enough to trust each other, brave enough to love. In the morning, Margaret woke wrapped in Joshua's arms, sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. She watched him sleep for a moment, his face peaceful in a way she'd never seen before. The lines of worry and grief had eased. He looked younger, lighter, free. When his eyes opened and found her watching, his smile was instant and warm. "Good morning, wife." "Good morning, husband." The words felt new and precious in her mouth. They rose together, dressing and moving through the morning routine with the easy comfort of people who belong together. Joshua made coffee while Margaret started breakfast. They ate at the table her father had built, in the house that was now theirs, and planned their day. "The north field needs to be plowed under before the ground freezes," Margaret said. "And we should check the hay stores, make sure there's enough for winter. I will repair the barn door today. It has been sticking." Joshua reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "And tonight, we will sit by the fire and read your brother's favorite book. You said he loved poetry." Margaret's throat tightened. Joshua understood that honoring the dead was important, that Thomas deserved to be remembered. He did. Whitman. He used to read it aloud to the cows because he said it made them produce better milk. Joshua laughed, the sound rich and warm. Then we will read Whitman. For Thomas, and for the cows. They worked side by side through the day, and Margaret marveled at how natural it felt. Joshua was strong and skilled, but he always asked her opinion, always treated her as an equal partner. When she suggested a better way to stack the hay, he tried it. When he showed her a Cheyenne technique for repairing leather, she learned eagerly. They were building something together, brick by brick, day by day. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the prairie in shades of amber and rose, they stood together at the fence line, where Margaret had first seen Joshua ride up all those weeks ago. So much had changed since that day. So much had been lost and found and fought for. I used to stand here and feel so alone, Margaret said quietly, so afraid of losing everything. Now I stand here and feel like the richest woman in Nebraska. Joshua's arm tightened around her waist. The land is good, but it is not the land that makes you rich. No. She turned in his arms, looking up into his eyes. It's love that makes me rich. Your love. The love we fought for and earned. He kissed her softly, sweetly, with all the tenderness in his heart. When they broke apart, both were smiling. The future stretched before them, full of work and challenges and the everyday struggles of frontier life. But they would face it together. Two people who'd survived the worst and found the best in each other. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, they walked hand in hand back to the house. Smoke rose from the chimney, warm light glowed in the windows, and inside waited the life they'd built from ashes and hope. Their home, their love, there forever. The prairie wind whispered around them, carrying the promise of winter and the certainty of spring beyond. And in that moment, standing on the threshold of their home with her husband's hand warm in hers, Margaret Monroe Ashford knew that every loss, every struggle, every moment of fear had been worth it, because it had led her here, to him, to home. When her brother vanished, she lost everything. A Cheyenne scout helped her find more than she'd lost. They woke the next morning to frost painting the windows in delicate patterns. Winter's warning that the easy days were ending. Margaret stretched in the warmth of their bed, feeling Joshua's arm tighten around her waist, pulling her close. These quiet mornings were her favorite, before the demands of the day intruded, when it was just the two of them in their own world. We should check the livestock, Joshua murmured against her hair. Make sure they have enough water. The trough may be frozen. 5 more minutes, Margaret said, burrowing deeper into his warmth. Just 5 more minutes of pretending we don't have 100 chores waiting. His laugh rumbled through his chest. 5 minutes. Then we face the day. They made it 7 minutes before guilt and responsibility drove them from the bed. Margaret dressed in her warmest work clothes, layering a wool vest over her cotton dress. Joshua pulled on the heavy coat she'd made him from an old buffalo hide, lined with flannel. They moved through the morning routine with practiced efficiency. Coffee first, then breakfast, then out to face whatever the prairie winter demanded. The horses nickered greeting as they entered the barn, their breath steaming in the cold air. Joshua was right. The water trough had a thin skin of ice that he broke with the flat of his hand. Margaret forked fresh hay into the feeding racks while he checked each animal, running knowing hands over legs and backs, making sure no injury or illness had appeared overnight. "They are all well," he said finally. "Strong and healthy. They will make it through the winter with no trouble." Margaret leaned against the barn wall, watching him work. Sometimes she still couldn't quite believe this was real, that this strong, gentle man was her husband, that they had a future stretching before them, full of ordinary days and shared work and love that grew deeper with every passing hour. Joshua caught her watching and smiled. "What are you thinking?" "That I'm grateful. For all of it. Even the hard parts that brought us here." She moved closer, her hand finding his. "My father used to say that God works in mysterious ways. I never understood what he meant until now. All that pain, all that loss, it led me to you. And me to you." Joshua brought her hand to his lips, kissing her work-roughened knuckles. "My people believe that everything is connected, that there are no accidents, only patterns we cannot yet see. I searched for my sister for 12 years. That search brought me here, to you, to this life. Perhaps that was the pattern all along." They stood together in the barn, surrounded by the gentle sounds of animals and the smell of hay and horses. And Margaret felt such peace it was almost overwhelming. This was enough. This simple life, this good man, this home they were building together. Everything else was just details. The morning passed in steady work. They reinforced the chicken coop against winter storms, stacked more firewood on the porch where it would stay dry, checked the root cellar to make sure the vegetables they'd stored were holding well. Every task was easier with 2 pairs of hands, with someone to hold the ladder steady or lift the heavy end. Around midday, they took a break for lunch, sitting at their kitchen table with cold meat and fresh bread Margaret had baked the day before. Joshua produced an apple from his pocket, polishing it on his shirt before cutting it in half to share. "I have been thinking," he said carefully, "about the spring, about San Francisco." Margaret's heart clenched, not with fear exactly, but with the acknowledgement of something they'd been avoiding. "You want to go see your sister. I need to. But I do not want to leave you for months. The journey is long, difficult." He met her eyes. "Come with me. We will go together. See little bird. Make sure she is well. Then come home." "Together," Margaret repeated, tasting the word. "I like that. Yes. We'll go together in the spring, after the planting. Take the train from Omaha. Make an adventure of it." She smiled. "I've never been further than Lincoln. It would be good to see more of the world." Relief flooded Joshua's face. "You are sure? It will be expensive. The train fare and hotels. We have the money from the settlement. And besides, some things are more important than money." Margaret reached across the table, threading her fingers through his. "Your sister matters. Family matters. We'll make it work." The afternoon brought unexpected visitors. Captain Harrison rode up with 2 other soldiers, their horses steaming in the cold air. Margaret and Joshua came out to greet them, curious and slightly wary. Official visits rarely meant good news. "Captain," Joshua said, shaking the man's hand. "What brings you out here?" Harrison dismounted, looking uncomfortable. "Official business, I'm afraid. The Army has decided to conduct a formal inquiry into Carlisle's activities." They want statements from both of you. Detailed accounts of everything that happened. Margaret exchanged a glance with Joshua. They'd already given statements to the local sheriff. The idea of reliving it all again, of picking through the violence and fear in official language for official records, made her tired. But she understood. The evidence they'd found implicated people beyond just Carlisle. The conspiracy had reached into banks, land offices, even the army itself. "When do they need us?" she asked. "Tomorrow, if possible, at Fort McPherson. The inquiry board is only here for a week." Harrison looked genuinely apologetic. "I know it's an inconvenience, but your testimony could help put away some very dangerous men." Joshua nodded slowly. "We will come. Tomorrow morning." After Harrison left, they spent the evening preparing. Margaret pressed her best dress, the dark blue wool she'd worn to her wedding. Joshua cleaned and oiled his good boots, the ones he wore when dealing with army officers and their endless paperwork. They went to bed early, both quiet with the weight of tomorrow's obligation. The ride to Fort McPherson took most of the morning. They arrived to find the inquiry already in session. A long table set up in the fort's main hall with 3 army officers seated as judges. Margaret and Joshua were separated, each giving testimony in turn while the other waited outside. Margaret's testimony took 2 hours. They asked her to recount everything, from Thomas's disappearance to the final confrontation at the creek. She answered as clearly as she could, though reliving it brought back the terror, the certainty that she was going to die. When they asked about Carlisle's final words, about his admission that he'd killed her father and brother, her voice shook, but held steady. When she finally emerged, Joshua was waiting, his face tight with barely controlled anger. They asked about Sand Creek, he said quietly, about the children taken. They wanted to know if I could identify any other officers involved. Could you? No. I was 13 when it happened, and they all looked the same to me then. White men in blue uniforms, all killing everything they could reach. His jaw worked. But they have names now. From the documents Thomas found, men who stole children, murdered families, and then went on to have long, successful army careers. They will face justice. Finally, the inquiry released them with thanks and the promise that their testimony would help ensure convictions. They rode home in thoughtful silence, processing the day, the memories stirred up, the old wounds reopened. But there was also satisfaction. Justice, slow and imperfect as it was, would be served. That evening, they sat by the fire as they'd promised, reading Whitman aloud to each other. Margaret stumbled over the unfamiliar rhythms, but Joshua's voice was steady and sure. When he read Song of Myself, his accent adding music to the already musical lines, Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. I celebrate myself and sing myself, Joshua read, and what I assume you shall assume. For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. He looked up, meeting her eyes across the firelight. Your brother had good taste in poetry. He did. Margaret wiped at her eyes. He would have liked you, Joshua. He would have been glad to know I wasn't alone. He is not alone either, Joshua said softly. Wherever he is, whatever comes after, he knows he saved his sister. He knows he helped me find mine. That is a legacy worth leaving. The winters settled in with determination, bringing snow and bitter cold that kept them close to home. But Margaret found she didn't mind. There was always work to do, projects to plan, long evenings by the fire with Joshua reading or telling stories about his childhood among the Cheyenne. She learned about his people, their customs and beliefs, their history. He learned about her family, about growing up on the Nebraska prairie, about the dreams her father had for this land. They talked about children sometimes, carefully, both aware of the grief each carried from past losses. Margaret's husband had died before they could start a family. Joshua's wife had been pregnant when the cholera took her, taking their unborn child too. The subject was tender, fraught with old pain, but also hope. Maybe, in time, they would be blessed. Maybe this land would hear the laughter of children again. For now, though, this was enough. Two people who'd survived the worst life could throw at them, building something good from the wreckage. A home. A partnership. A love that grew stronger with every day. January brought a blizzard that lasted 3 days. Snow piling so high they had to tunnel out to reach the barn. They took turns. One person fighting through the drifts to feed and water the animals while the other kept the fire going and hot food ready. It was exhausting, dangerous work, but they never complained. This was prairie life. You endured, or you died. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. They woke to brilliant sunshine on endless white. The world transformed. Joshua stood on the porch, shading his eyes against the glare, and Margaret came to stand beside him. "Beautiful," she said. "Deadly, but beautiful. Like the prairie itself." Joshua's arm came around her shoulders. "It tests you constantly, but if you are strong enough, wise enough, it gives back more than it takes." By February, the days were starting to lengthen, the sun climbing higher in the sky. They began planning for spring planting, discussing what crops to try, where to rotate fields, whether to expand the vegetable garden. Joshua wanted to try some of the Cheyenne farming techniques he'd learned as a boy, companion planting and natural fertilizers. Margaret was eager to experiment. The letter from San Francisco arrived in early March, brought by the mail rider along with a package. Margaret recognized Sarah Chen's handwriting on the envelope. Joshua opened it with hands that shook slightly, hope and fear warring on his face. "Brother?" the letter began. Margaret watched Joshua's eyes move over the words, saw tears start to fall. Finally, he lowered the letter, his voice rough as he read parts aloud. "She says she has told her husband and children about me, about her Cheyenne family. Her children want to meet their uncle." He swallowed hard. "She says she has always felt incomplete, like part of her was missing. Now, knowing I searched for her, knowing I never forgot, that hole is beginning to heal." The package contained a photograph, a Chinese man and a Cheyenne woman, clearly prosperous, surrounded by 3 children of mixed heritage. Sarah was beautiful, with her mother's eyes that Joshua said he remembered. Wearing American clothes, but with her long black hair and a traditional braid. She looked happy. She looked loved. "She made a good life," Margaret said softly. "Despite everything, she survived and made something good." "Like us," Joshua said. He set the photograph on the mantel, where they could see it every day. "She is coming home, in a way. Not to the Cheyenne, but to knowing where she came from. That is enough." April brought the thaw, the prairie slowly emerging from winter's grip. The fields turned from white to brown to the first hints of green. Birds returned, their songs filling the air. Life, reasserting itself after the long cold. Margaret and Joshua worked from dawn to dusk, plowing fields, planting seeds, repairing fences damaged by winter. It was backbreaking work, but satisfying. Every seed planted was an act of faith, a belief in the future. By the time May arrived, the fields were showing neat rows of corn and wheat, the garden bursting with early vegetables. They set a date for their trip to California. First week of June, after the crops were established but before harvest. They'd take the train from Omaha, a journey of nearly a week, and spend 2 weeks in San Francisco before returning home. The neighbors agreed to check on the farm while they were gone, to water the garden and feed the animals. The night before they left, Margaret stood at the fence line watching the sunset, this place that had become her ritual. Joshua found her there, slipping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Nervous?" he asked. "A little. It's a big journey. And meeting your sister, that's important. I want her to like me." "She will love you," Joshua said with certainty. "How could she not? You are brave, and kind, and strong. Everything she wrote in her letters says she values those things." Margaret leaned back against him, solid and warm. "What if she wants you to stay? To live near her, be part of her family?" "This is our home." Joshua's arms tightened. "Our farm, our life. We will visit, stay connected. But this is where we belong. Where your father's blood soaked into the soil, where Thomas died protecting what he loved. Where we built something from nothing. This is home." The journey west was everything Margaret had imagined, and more. The train was crowded and noisy, the landscape rushing past the windows almost too fast to comprehend. They passed through prairies that looked like home, then mountains that took her breath away, then desert that seemed to go on forever. Joshua pointed out landmarks, explaining the geography with a scout's eye for terrain. In San Francisco, the city overwhelmed her at first. So many people, so many buildings, noise and motion, and the sharp salt smell of the ocean. But Sarah's home was a haven, a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood where flowers bloomed year-round. The reunion between Joshua and his sister was tender and heartbreaking and beautiful. They stood in Sarah's front hall, just looking at each other, both crying, both laughing. Then Sarah threw herself into her brother's arms, holding tight, and Joshua buried his face in her hair, his shoulders shaking with sobs 12 years in the making. Margaret watched with tears streaming down her own face as Sarah's husband gathered their children close, giving the siblings this moment. When they finally broke apart, Sarah turned to Margaret, her eyes red but shining. "Thank you," she said simply, "for loving my brother, for giving him a home, for helping him find me." "He found you himself," Margaret said. "I just helped him finish the journey." The 2 weeks passed in a blur of family dinners, walks along the ocean, stories shared and connections forged. Sarah's children adored their Uncle Joshua, climbing on him and begging for stories about the prairie. Sarah and Margaret became fast friends, 2 women who'd survived impossible things and come out stronger. On their last night in California, Sarah gave Joshua a gift, a small bundle wrapped in cloth, which he opened to find a duskin pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. "Mother made it," Sarah said softly. "Before Sand Creek, I managed to keep it all these years, hidden away. I want you to have it now. So part of her goes home with you." Joshua held the pouch like it was made of gold and starlight, his eyes streaming. "Thank you. Sister, thank you." The journey home felt different, lighter somehow. They'd gone to California carrying the weight of 12 years of searching, of not knowing. They returned with the knowledge that Sarah was well, that she'd made a good life, that the family was healing even if it could never be whole again. Nebraska welcomed them with a June rainstorm, the kind that soaked everything but left the air clean and fresh. Their farm looked beautiful, the crops thriving, everything green and growing. The neighbors had done well caring for things, and Margaret made a mental note to repay them with a good dinner and some of her preserved fruit. That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the clouds clear and the stars emerge. Joshua had Sarah's pouch in his hands, his thumb tracing the beadwork patterns. Margaret leaned against his shoulder, content and complete. "Home," Joshua said softly. "We are home." "Yes," Margaret agreed. "We're home." The summer passed in the rhythm of farm life, tending crops, dealing with weather, the endless cycle of work that defined prairie existence. But there were good times too. Sunday dinners with neighbors, a barn dance in town where Joshua surprised everyone by being an excellent dancer, long evenings sitting on the porch, planning and dreaming and simply being together. In August, Margaret realized she'd missed her monthly cycle. She waited another month before letting herself hope, before saying anything to Joshua. But when September arrived and there was still no sign, she finally allowed herself to believe. She told him at breakfast on a morning bright with early autumn gold. He'd been talking about the harvest schedule, planning which fields to take first, when she simply said, "Joshua, I'm pregnant." The silence stretched long enough that she started to worry. Then, he was out of his chair, pulling her up into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. When he pulled back, his face was wet with tears, his smile radiant. A child. Our child. His hand came to rest on her still flat belly, reverent and awed. "Margaret, are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. But yes, I'm sure." They held each other in the kitchen, the morning light painting everything gold, and Margaret felt such overwhelming gratitude she could barely contain it. A child. New life, growing inside her. The ultimate proof that good could come from pain, that love could triumph over loss. The harvest that year was the best they'd ever seen. The crops came in strong and healthy, the prices were good, and by the time they'd sold everything and paid their bills, they had a substantial sum set aside. Joshua began planning an expansion to the house, a proper nursery for the baby. Margaret started sewing tiny clothes, her hands creating garments for a child not yet born, but already so deeply loved. As winter approached again, their first full year of marriage drawing to a close, they took stock of all they'd built. The farm was prosperous, the land secure. They had friends, community, a place in the world. Joshua's sister was found, healing, part of their lives now through letters and the promise of future visits. And soon, there would be a child. Their child, born of love and hope, and the belief that the future could be better than the past. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling soft outside and a fire crackling on the hearth, Joshua gave Margaret a gift. A small wooden box, beautifully carved with prairie flowers and Cheyenne symbols. Inside was a letter, written in his careful hand. "My beloved wife," it began, 1 year ago, I was alone. I had been alone for so long I had forgotten what it meant to be part of something larger than myself. Then I found you, and everything changed. You gave me home. You gave me love. You gave me hope. And now you are giving me the greatest gift of all, a child to carry our love into the future. I promise to spend every day of my life being worthy of you, of us, of the family we are building. I love you beyond words, beyond measure, beyond the bounds of this world. Yours always, Joshua. Margaret read it through tears, then read it again. She had no gift as perfect to give him in return, but she took his hand and placed it on her belly, where the baby was just starting to show. "Feel that?" she whispered. "That's our future. That's our miracle. That's proof that love wins, Joshua. After everything, after all the pain and loss and fighting, love wins." He leaned forward, kissing her with infinite tenderness. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the prairie in white. Inside, by the fire, two people who'd found each other against all odds held close and planned for tomorrow. The baby arrived in late March, during a storm that raged for 2 days. The doctor made it through the snow just in time. And Margaret's labor was long, but uncomplicated. When Joshua heard his son's first cry, he wept with relief and joy, so profound it seemed to fill the whole house. They named him Thomas James Ashford. Thomas for Margaret's brother, James for Joshua's father. The baby had his mother's green eyes and his father's black hair, and he was perfect in every way. On a morning in early April, after the storms had passed and the prairie was beginning to green up again, Margaret stood at the fence line with baby Thomas in her arms. Joshua came to stand beside her, his arm around her shoulders, and together they looked out across the land that was theirs, the land they'd fought for and bled for and nearly died for. "Your grandfather built this place," Margaret told the baby softly. "Your uncle died protecting it. Your father saved it. And now you're here, the next generation, the future we fought for." Thomas gurgled and grabbed her finger, his grip surprisingly strong. Joshua laughed, the sound warm and full of wonder. "He will be strong, like his mother, and wise, like his father." They stood together in the spring sunshine, a family complete. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, beautiful and harsh and home. Their crops were planted. Their livestock was thriving. Their house stood strong against whatever storms might come. They had neighbors who'd become friends, a community that had accepted them, a place in the world they'd carved out together. In San Francisco, Sarah would read their letter about the baby and weep with joy for her brother, grateful that he'd found happiness after so much sorrow. In the ground up north, Thomas and their father rested easier, knowing the farm they'd died for was safe, thriving, passed on to a new generation. And on this patch of Nebraska prairie, beside the Platte River, under the endless sky, Margaret and Joshua Ashford raised their son and worked their land and loved each other with the fierce devotion of two people who knew exactly how precious their happiness was. They'd earned it, paid for it in blood and tears and courage, and they would never, ever take it for granted. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. There would be more children, more challenges, more storms to weather, But they would face it all together, as partners, as lovers, as the family they'd chosen to become. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done, and the baby slept, and the stars wheeled overhead, they would sit on their porch and remember. Remember the journey that had brought them here. Remember the people they'd lost along the way. Remember that love, true love, was worth fighting for, worth living for, worth everything. This was their happily ever after. Hard won, deeply earned, absolutely real. And it was perfect.